Hey, welcome, Facebook, all of you out there on different social medias, friends and family. We are super excited. Casey and I are super excited to be here with you in this February 2025 as we continue to go through how to win friends and influence people.
No, certainly.
Yeah. And so, guys, today, what we're kind of going to be going through is what's considered chapter 9, what everybody wants. What everybody wants. And so what it's breaking down is what people really want. And I'll just read right out of this in the book, and I kind of underlined it. It said, 3/4 of the people you will ever meet are hungering and thirsting for sympathy. Give it to them and they will love you. So, Casey, what do you think about that statement? 3/4 of the people you will ever meet are hungering and thirsting for sympathy.
I think for me, it goes back to the fact of, we as people are just naturally selfish in a lot of ways. And it's natural to be that way. That's human, right?
Mm-hmm.
To want for me to look out for me, just like we talked about, with, the last episode we did, the lion's looking out for him.
Mm.
He's not looking out for anybody else. He's looking out for how's he going to eat today. He don't care who he hurts or whatever else. But
Yeah.
I think that's a natural thing, and I think sympathy plays into that. It's oh, my day's so much tougher than yours. I want you to feel sorry for me because of that. It boosts my ego to know that somebody acknowledges that maybe my time's a little bit tougher than yours, or maybe my injury's worse than yours, or um,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. I think a lot of people really feed off of that,
Mhm.
and I think there's a time and a place for it. I think sympathy is definitely a great tool to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a lot of cases it's very well earned. There's some people that, there's some situations that I'm truly sympathetic for, and there's others that, with my background in raising, I'm like, okay, get over it,
Mhm.
like
I hear
just
you, man.
move on.
May I ask, Casey, who in your life has been somebody that you would say has been fairly sympathetic to you? Or maybe not even to you personally, or somebody you just look at and say, man, they're kind of a sympathetic person. They understand how to do that pretty well.
Uh, I
This
feel
trait
like,
will come more natural to some than
yeah,
others.
I feel like my Aunt Lisa is a great example of that. Growing up, which technically she's my cousin, but we've always called her Aunt Lisa.
She was just
You know,
sympathetic enough to let you call her as long as you called her,
well,
right?
yeah, I think she was always a great example of that, of being that. But she was also, she wasn't afraid to
Mhm.
kind of stand her ground and be like, okay, well, if that's the way you want to think, then
Yeah,
I'm going to continue on with what I'm
that's
doing.
true.
I think she's a great example of that, to be honest with you, in my life growing up. With that, and I think I've been fortunate enough to be around a lot of people that were somewhat that way, but also, when it got to the line of you're just you're just whining, you're just
Mhm.
complaining to be complaining. I mean, they wasn't afraid to tell you,
Right.
you know,
And there's a need for that,
you know.
no doubt about it in this day and age where
Hmm.
we can have cancel culture and,
Yeah.
people are fairly sensitive in this day and age.
Hmm.
A little different than when we go back and we look at our dad's generation.
Yeah.
They were just a little tougher at that time.
Yeah.
But still, the ability to be sympathetic, to empathize with people, to kind of allow them to vent their hurts, pains, concerns is powerful. And your aunt was able to do that for you. It's
Yeah.
really your cousin. She was somebody that you felt comfortable maybe sharing that with?
Well, I don't know that we ever had really in-depth conversations, growing up or anything, but it was, she always had that caring personality, which is the sympathetic side of,
Mm-hmm.
of caring about those
So
situations. And
you could
anytime,
feel that care?
yeah,
Did she
anytime,
show it? What did it look like?
well, I think it's more of just, always asking, how you doing? How's the family? How's work? All that. And like, even now, it may be, 3 months or so at a time when I see her now versus, growing up, I seen her weekly.
Mm-hmm.
But even in those times, it's always, how's everybody doing? How's, you still
Mhm.
liking Tansy?
Mhm.
You know, how's
Mhm.
work and
Mhm.
all that stuff. So that caring, sympathetic, empathetic, and honestly, you know, Miss Sierra that we work with here is very good at that too,
Yes.
and she shows that with her clients, you know, very well. You know, as I kind of think into that, um, she's another good one for that.
And then when we talk about the strength finders, we know you have relator. We know she has empathy,
Hmm.
but at times I'm thinking that you've learned how to be pretty sympathetic with people. You know, they
Yeah.
might tell you things and share stories with you that they're not going to do that with just anybody.
Hmm.
Do you find that at times with you having that relator in your
Yeah,
top?
I do,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of that comes from. I think for me, in my opinion, is breeding a culture of understanding that there's no judgment. Doesn't mean there's not going to be accountability for things, but there's no judgment on things. I'm not going to say, well, you know, you're a bad person for thinking
Mhm.
that way, or you shouldn't think that
Don't be
way, or
weak. Don't be
yeah,
a wimp. You should toughen up.
yeah, you know. So there's that judgment zone is never going to be there. Doesn't mean there's not going to be accountability for not hitting parameters or things, but you know, I
Because if
think.
you're really a caring person, in my
Mhm.
opinion, you don't let somebody walk off a cliff
Right.
or run into a bunch of thickets and
Mhm.
not say, hey, man, I care deeply about you. In fact, I care so much
Yeah.
that I just want you to know if you keep going down that path, you're going to run into some pretty bad pickers down there.
Yeah.
So that you can be sympathetic and do it in a non-judgmental and a caring way.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
And you'll probably, would you say, Casey, that you would potentially listen to them more when you know they care about you than you would somebody like maybe just.
Oh yeah, I think that's natural, right? I mean, I think that's the majority of people,
Mhm.
you know, until you know, the famous saying, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care,
Right.
right? Um,
People don't want to know how much you know until they know how much you care.
yeah, I
Yes.
mean, I think
When.
that really sums up the
Mhm.
chapter in a lot of ways. You
Mhm.
know, it's you
Mhm.
can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't care about who you're giving it to, it doesn't really matter.
And it's funny, man, in life and relationships. I was reading. It was Valentine's Day, so I was reading over some uh, Valentine's relationship stuff that gets. I subscribe to a magazine called 440. It's a print that gets sent to me through James Clear, who wrote the book Atomic Habits.
Okay.
He recommended it, so I started reading it, and they're really deep, long sometimes articles. But it was talking a lot about Valentine's. It said that a lot of times what happens in relationships is we kind of just start stonewalling in a husband and wife relationship. I didn't know that 40 to 50% of all people that now marry will end in a divorce. The number goes up to 60 on the second marriage, and on the third marriage it's up to 70%. So usually if you don't get this part right here, it just never gets right. And so, but they said, it starts off kind of with criticism and ends with stonewalling. And there's a
Mhm.
couple in between they talked about. But like when somebody comes to you with a problem, the last thing you need to do is just start trying to criticize. Well, man, that was just dumb. Why did you do it like that? What were you thinking? But if you sympathize with them, take a moment to hear them. And I believe that God gave us two ears and two eyes and one mouth for a reason. We
Right.
can listen twice as much as we speak, then we can really begin to gain or garner more influence with the people we work with,
Yeah.
live, and serve. Um, so I agree with you. I think you've said it so well. Being sympathetic isn't a place of weakness, but it's a place of care and concern that when we can choose to be that way, sometimes, people just got to learn the hard way. But if we criticize somebody, if we always say, well, that's not good, I think that a lot of us probably grew up in homes where we didn't feel like what we did was ever good enough. And why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe mom was stressed, dad was stressed. Life just stresses people, and so they put that pressure on their kids a lot of
Mhm.
times. But when your kids, I remember when I first met Lindsay. I'll never forget when I just kind of knew, like, man, I think I can marry this woman. And it was a conversation. I'm always a little, I'm not going to share my testimony with just everybody. But me and Lindsay had got to know each other well enough that I had spoken to her a little bit about my childhood and the way my mother was, and she was just depressed, tough, and she checked out physically, mentally, was abusive in a lot of ways. So I was sharing that with Lindsay, and I just never forget. Lindsay looked at me and she said, "That is so sad." She said, "That's not the way a mother should be." She said, when you come from home and you've had a bad day at school, the mother should be able to look at you, be able to read that on you, say, "Come here, Johnny, sit down, tell me about your day." And like, what kid wouldn't love that spot to be able to go to in life? And unfortunately, Casey, I think nowadays, man, if you've got 3 or 4 people that will actually slow down enough to hear your problems and care enough to try to help you in your situation, you're a very blessed person.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And, I think the fast pacedness of the world has maybe taken that out of the world a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think, the average attention span for most Americans now is 5 to 7 seconds.
Yeah.
So how quick is that? Every 5 to 7 seconds, you're thinking about something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how hard it is to actually slow down and
Yeah.
engage and listen and truthfully listen,
Yeah.
not just be present.
Yep.
There's a
Not
difference.
listen with the intentions of, I can't wait to get a break and get moving again.
Yeah.
And I'm bad for that.
Oh yeah. I mean, how often do you find yourself somebody's talking and you're thinking, okay, when are they going to stop talking so I can say what I want to say?
Mm-hmm.
And you're not hearing what they're saying because you're thinking about responding. And again,
And I could fix them if they just be quiet.
yeah,
But
yeah.
that ain't really what they want anyhow, right?
Yeah. And it's 100% that. And sometimes, and I've learned this. I learned this in music too. So this applies. This concept kind of applies to music in a lot of ways when I play, um, on stage and stuff. Is sometimes the most melodic thing you can play is nothing. Sometimes the most best advice you can give is peace, is silence, understanding. I mean, music when you're playing leads or you're playing solos or you're just playing a melody of any kind or a rhythm, sometimes the notes you don't play have just as much of an impact as the ones you do play. And that's a concept in music too that I've found to be very valuable in life. Sometimes
I like it, Casey. So with that, I am going to say to you and our listening audience, in life, I think a life would be a lot better if we learned how to pause, take a minute to listen, and instead of maybe criticize or even interject overly our opinion, just sympathize. And that's what Mr. Carnegie, I believe, is trying to teach us to do that. And that is a art and a skill that I think in our fast-paced world, as Casey and I were talking, we have forgotten, and it's gotten further and further away. If I ever really had a huge problem or a big burden on my shoulders, I'm pretty confident I could go visit my brother Casey. I could share with you a little bit about what's going on, and you wouldn't laugh me out of the room, or we joke around a little bit, me and you do, and that's great. I'm glad we have that relationship. Right. But at the end of the day, if I ever really had a problem, I think you'd be the guy that would sit there and listen to me.
Right.
And you've always been to me an old man's soul, and I don't know where you got that from, how exactly that's come about, but I've always thought you're not going to baby somebody. You're not going to rock them. If you burp them, it won't be long, because you want to see people get up and moving at a healthy pace. But you do that in generally a very caring way, as long as the people you're listening to are going to take to the whatever you're trying to teach, right?
I'm also quick to wash my hands too if I need to.
If you need to, you can, and that's I think that's a bit of a skill too. Probably not the skill we're talking about today.
No, it is not. It is not. But my again, to reiterate, my learning, my experience, and music taught me this again, and it applies to life. The things you don't say sometimes are just as impactful as the things you do, and learn how to take that breath, let it breathe, and have that peaceful moment of just being in the moment. That's where it's at.
With that being said, thank you all for listening. Hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thank you.